Welcome to Psychologist Talks. On today's episode, I want to talk about more conservative methods of supervision and why there's like a faux wisdom behind this. I think a lot of people try to convince people that there's a wisdom to this approach to supervision. Now, a quick clarification of what I mean by a more conservative approach is that I'm a relational psychodynamic provider and supervisor. And I'm not here to peddle that and say that everybody has to do it. In fact, if you go to my episode on that, it is unsafe for some people to go full on relational psychodynamic because they just aren't prepared and equipped to inhabit that space. But if we pay attention to common factors research in our work with clients, you better darn well believe if two mental health professionals are kind of trying to come together and develop a future mental health professional, I would imagine common factors stuff would probably come up there. So inherently, supervision has to be at least somewhat relational. And so a conservative approach essentially is an a-relational, an anti-relational approach that the supervisor removes themselves from the equation, yet also has lots of rules and regulations around what supervision is supposed to look like. Now, I'll go briefly into the pros or the kind of maybe allowable-ish iterations of this just to respect that this isn't like supervisors just being horrible people. But then I'll quickly hopefully jump into the cons and the faux wisdom of it. So what are the potential pros? Well, I mean, I will say the best case scenario is if the site is billed as we're going to get you to be an expert in this single intervention and you're going to be top of the line, best trained in this intervention. There tends to be more, and the supervisee is agreeing and knowing that that's what they're applying to, or the job or the site, whatever it is, the organization focuses on this. There's at least a mutual agreement around this, and it's about that building of expertise, and because of that, it's much more mechanical in nature, and because of that, it tends to be a little bit less relational. Now, if you were listening to what I was saying, invariably, even super manualized interventions exist within a relational frame based on at least common factors research, not like relational psychodynamic frame, but just relational in general, common factors sort of stuff. So the best version of that more conservative approach, I would argue, still has at least attending to some degree of the human being behind the intervention. Otherwise, I regret to inform those people that they are failing their supervisee, and they will likely struggle as a provider if they're not actively tending to the relational subcomponents. But again, it feels a little bit more permissible in those sorts of environments. I imagine this sometimes in like neuropsychology sites that are more kind of testing and assessment focused. There's a relational subtext to it all, but I totally understand that science is often what is taking precedence, or what is understood in the current version of science takes the precedent over the relational stuff. So again, I give a little bit of permission around that. But I think that's kind of where it ends. Is like if there's a mutual agreement, okay, fine. But otherwise, if a supervisor themselves, ignoring their own power in the relationship, the supervisee is typically showing up deferring to the supervisor. Even the most kind of rebellious of people that I've met have a tendency towards deference. Not always, but more often than not. And so there's this absolute ignoring of the power imbalance, and that a supervisor is saying like, I'm basically here. You have to follow the rules, come in with content, and then I'll tell you what to do, or I'll just respond to your inquiry. The end. That puts the supervisee in a really challenging position to offer or to inhabit that space in any additional way whatsoever, which is not going to help with cultural competence. It's not going to help with humility. It's not going to help with common factors. It's not going to help with countertransference. And so it is a very unhealthy approach to assume you can just kind of check out in that regard. The most caustic and unhealthy is like, I'm going to tell you what to do, and you're basically going to become a miniature version of me. And if you don't do that, then you're being obstinate or resistant or whatever it might be. And that's like, 9 out of 10, if not 10 out of 10 supervisees report those are horrible supervision experiences because they're transactional and oppressive. Never mind just transactional. The more common approach is the hands-off approach. It says like, look, I need you to be honest with me when there's problems. If there's any ethical issues, you need to bring that up. Risk issues are a priority. Remember, the client is number one. I can't know what you need if you don't tell me, so you're going to show up prepared. I'll show up. Usually people with this mentality barely show up prepared as supervisors and say, what is it that you need? And they'll often be billed as a developmental model, but experientially it's a hands-off conservative approach. And the faux wisdom in this is like, well, it's safe. I don't have to worry about anything. The onus and the responsibility is on the supervisee. If they are doing well, then they're going to do well because they have questions and they respond to the offerings that I give them. And then they ideally are learning with their clients, and I can wipe my hands of it so I can go do other things. And if they have problems because of that frame, it's going to be their problem because they didn't bring it up. They weren't proactive. They weren't listening correctly. And to me, it's a really perverse and sort of irresponsible way of grappling with the power that they have, that a supervisor has. Because, I mean, it's just like you with less power have total control over this. And if you succeed, it's of our mutual benefit. And I've been a good supervisor. And if you fail, it is because you yourself are failing. And there's no wisdom in that whatsoever. You have to, as a supervisor, lean in and kind of model, like, how are you feeling? How is your personal life, interfacing with your professional life, at least to a small degree? Even if I don't actively use countertransference, and I don't believe even in the use of countertransference within therapy or whatever intervention it is that we're talking about, I'll at least ask you about it to make sure that you're monitoring your own stuff. When personal life issues come up, how do we, structure around that? When there's disagreements amongst your cohort, it's not the defaulting to like, you need to figure your shit out or you're in trouble. It's like, well, let's walk through that. How do we engage in conflict management? How can you be not just a professional in the room with a client, but with fellow professionals? That requires more work, and it increases the likelihood, if not the inevitability, that drama, quote unquote, and issues will have to be navigated if you open that door. And so the faux wisdom is, if I close that door, that's the best way to supervise, and it's a safe way to supervise. In reality, it's a supervisor protecting themselves and leaving a supervisee out to hang on their own. So I'm probably going to have an episode talking about like why people shift this way. I think often people they don't default to a conservative approach. Some people do. Some people are absolutely trash supervisors and they should never be a supervisor, or they would need heavy supervision to be good supervisors. But more often it's a reaction to something that's gone wrong when they tried to be more open, and we'll leave that to another episode. So as always, thank you for listening and watching, and stay curious.